All right, here with us now is political strategist and commentator Rina Shah. Rina, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. I want to talk to you about two things. Obviously, we want to start with the debate. Also want to talk about Kevin McCarthy. Let's start with what's happening, though, tonight in Tuscaloosa. There will be 4 candidates on that stage. Obviously, the leader of the pack, though, is absent. What do you think we'll be seeing tonight, and how are they going to really try to stand out?
I think we'll see attempts for a breakout moment, a moment in which they really plant the flag to be the nominee. This is a real last attempt. I mean, this stage has dwindled for a reason. And when you're looking at the polling, well, I don't think many of these candidates are looking at the polling, but what you see is a woman who has been able to climb in the polls because of her performances in the past 3 debates. And so I think, again, tonight is going to be about centering on Nikki Haley, making sure she doesn't get the coveted spot as nominee. And so Chris Christie, though he is very ideologically aligned with her, he will take those jabs. Vivek Ramaswamy and she, I believe, will continue to give each other cold shoulders, but Ramaswamy will probably hit directly. Hopefully no more low blows like the other time, this last time. And then DeSantis, I think he's really just going to maintain because he feels what he said with Newsom was enough to show that he's somebody that can be steady. I would sort of push back on that, saying that wouldn't he be in a better place now if he really were that steady. So a lot on the line tonight, but 3 issues I'm looking to hear about are economy, crime, public safety, and of course, foreign affairs.
Yeah, certainly foreign affairs there, Rina. You mentioned Haley at the start, also DeSantis right now. Those really seem to be the 2 candidates people are talking about the most. Who do you think really has the most realistic shot of knocking Trump out of that top spot as the front runner?
I've been having this conversation all around DC for weeks on end, and it's no surprise that many people are still very much in the DeSantis camp because people think you need to be Trump light in order to win over those who are still very fervently either MAGA or want to continue to take a chance on Trump, having some degree of nostalgia for him in the White House, for what his administration essentially accomplished in his first term. But I will say this, there are people that are really who were turned out by Nikki Haley, for lack of a better phrase. They were turned off and turned out by her because of her time in the Trump administration. And maybe she was a bit lukewarm after she left the Trump administration. But they have put a fresh eye on her, a fresh lens, saying that this is somebody that could win a general election against whether it's Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or even anyone else. So again, a couple mixed thoughts here. I'm not hearing about Vivek Ramaswamy too much. There are people who think DeSantis has a sure shot at securing the nomination, but less of a shot for the general. And then there are people who think the inverse for Nikki Haley. It's really a mixed bag right now.
And Rina, I want to talk to you about comments that we heard yesterday from the front runner and then from the current president. So yesterday, the former president saying, he won't be a dictator except for on day 1. Also yesterday, President Biden saying he's not sure even if he'd be running if Trump wasn't in the race. What is your reaction to both of those comments from both of those men?
I'm deeply disturbed. I don't think in the year 2023 we should be hearing comments from a former president, Trump, that we just did. And the word dictator shouldn't even have to come up in a sentence, but yet here we are. If it looks like, walks like, talks like a dictator, it probably is. So any action he were to take on day 1 would cement very much what you could expect in the many days that would follow if there's a second Trump term. I think there's a lot to be scared about. The jailing of opponents, that's something that happens in countries that are not the United States. That happens in third world countries, and many men and women who put on the uniform of our great nation know that intimately. They're familiar, and it's not only because their own bravery, but the sacrifice of their fellow men and women in uniform. So I think it's dishonorable for the former president to be saying things like that. I think it disqualifies him for a second term as commander-in-chief, and I think we ought to not pay him any mind anymore and focus on these people who are on the stage tonight. You have a former governor of South Carolina, a current governor of Florida, a successful businessman, and let's not forget the former governor of New Jersey, who has a serious prosecutorial record as well. We have a lot of big issues in this nation, and these 4 people bring the kind of experience that I think could really be strong against Trump and makes a case that we need to do somebody new in the Republican Party. We need to elect somebody fresh and different so the Republicans can lead again.
And what do you think about, the current president saying that he may not even be running if Trump were not in the race? I mean, he kind of cleaned up the statement later. But an interesting statement to make nonetheless.
It is an interesting statement, but look, a lot of what Joe Biden says these days is to me really fed lines by his advisors, and that's not because he doesn't have the cognitive ability. It's because he wants to say things to get reelected, and painting Trump as this existential threat to the United States, which he very much is the thing he has to do over and over again. So it's very much out of a political playbook. It doesn't really make me feel some kind of way. And so while I applaud the current president for his leadership in some spheres, I'm deeply critical of how he's leading our nation right now. And I think in the Republican primary, again, we're seeing some good men and women who are younger, competent, experienced, and not to sound ageist, but experienced and qualified. And that's what we need as a match to Joe Biden.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.